ECOWAS leaders resolve to collaborate more effectively towards deepening economic and monetary integration.
President Buhari cautions ECOWAS leaders against tenure elongation.
Ahead of Edo and Ondo governorship election, IGP Muhammad Adamu meets top police management and squadron commanders.
For those of you to be deployed on this assignment, I must warn you to ensure that you operate strictly within the dictates of the Electoral Act.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss matters arising from the P&ID ruling.
Now, the recent judgment by the United Kingdom court on the $10 billion arbitration case between Nigeria and the Process and Industrials Development Limited, popularly known as P&ID, continue to generate discourse among Nigerian citizens.
The UK court in its decision granted Nigeria's application for an extension of time to appeal against the arbitral award and also relief from sanctions after the court ascertained that the gas supply and processing contract was obtained fraudulently.
This development was greeted with applause by many stakeholders, which tend to question the way and manner contracts were awarded to foreign firms without following due process.
Now, in its reaction, the presidency described the court's decision as right, just, and above all, providing a strong prima facie case that the gas deal with P&ID and the subsequent judgment debt of $10 billion nearly against Nigeria were a clear attempt to cheat the country out of billions of dollars by a company that had neither invested a kobo in the contract nor even had a capacity to execute the contract.
And other analysts see it as a victory for the nation, which attests to the determination of the present administration to fight corruption in all ramifications.
So, what does the latest decision mean to Nigeria? And is that the end of the matter, as some persons have been asking? And what lessons are there to learn from the latest court ruling, and indeed the entire chase against P&ID? And what sanctions could there possibly be for those who aided and abetted the fraudulent contracts? And what should Nigeria do in the award of contracts in future or entering into any such agreement with foreign partners? This is Good Morning Nigeria, and I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I welcome you to the program.
And I am Jumwa Yusuf. Thanks so much for joining us. We are transmitting live on the network service of the NTA from our studios here in Abuja. We shall bring you the morning news and also serve you other complimentary segments in the course of the program. But let's join Naja Atu Tijani with the morning news. Good morning, Naja.
Good morning, Jumwa and Kingsley. Here is the morning news. ECOWAS leaders have resolved to collaborate more effectively to deepen the economic and monetary integration, as well as consolidating political stability, peace and security. Taking this position at the end of an extraordinary summit in Niamey, Niger Republic, the leaders expressed gratitude to President Muhammad Buhari for providing coordinated strategic response to fighting COVID-19 in the sub-region.
Sub-region to be more self-reliant in the fight against terrorism, and they want to raise over $1 billion for that peace fund, and they recognize Nigeria's contribution already, 100 million that we've contributed in that fight. So again, they were extremely grateful to Mr. President for his commitment. I think that what we saw was the commitment of all the leaders to the ECOWAS vision and roadmap.
The Nigerian government has cautioned that with the enormous socio-economic and security challenges confronting West Africa, the sub-region cannot afford another political crisis in the guise of tenure elongation. This was while addressing the 57th extraordinary session of the Authority of ECOWAS Heads of State and Government in Niamey, the Republic of Niger. The president also expressed concern over the premature adoption of ECO as a single currency by French-speaking West African countries, stressing the need for them to return to the agreed roadmap. And amidst the outcry raised by Nigerians over the increase in fuel pump price and electricity tariff, President Muhammadu Buhari says his government is not insensitive to the current economic difficulties people are facing and the very tough economic situation the nation is also facing. He stresses that government certainly will not inflict hardship on the people. Speaking through Vice President Yemi Osinbajo at the opening of a two-day ministerial performance review retreat, the president said he's convinced that if the nation stays focused on its plans, brighter and more prosperous days will come soon. The president says ministers and senior officials must accordingly ensure the vigorous and prompt implementation of the Economic Sustainability Plan program, which will give succor to Nigerians.
Should even attempt to go back to the business of fixing or subsidizing petroleum prices or PMS prices. First of all, it will mean a return to the costly subsidy regime. Today, as we've heard, we have 60% less revenues. We simply cannot afford the cost.
The federal government has restated that every decision it takes is in the overall interest and common good of the citizens. The Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, stated this at a joint media briefing on the recent increase in petrol and electricity prices in Abuja.
The angry reactions that have greeted the latest prices of premium motor spirit PMS are therefore unnecessary and totally mischievous. Gentlemen, the truth of the matter is that subsidizing fuel is no longer feasible, especially under the prevailing economic conditions in the country. The government simply can no longer afford fuel subsidy.
Ahead of the October 10 governorship poll in Ondo State, the Independent National Electoral Commission has handed the register of voters to the political parties in the state. The commission also organized an electoral security training for security agents to ensure safety of lives and property before, during, and after the election.
Assure you that the Commission will open the window for another continuous voter registration once the course is clear on the currently raging pandemics.
Preparatory to the Edo and Ondo governorship elections, the Nigeria Police Force is perfecting strategies to ensure a hitch-free poll. To this end, a meeting between top police management and 79 squadron commanders from across the country has been held, where emphasis was laid on professionalism, neutrality, and citizen-friendly approach.
For those of you to be deployed on this assignment, I must warn you to ensure that you operate strictly within the dictates of the Electoral Act. I strongly warn all political gladiators and the electors in Edo and Ondo states to situate all their electioneering activities within the dictates of the rule of law.
The Nigeria Center for Disease Control has announced 155 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in 15 states of the Federation and the FCT. The new figures indicate that Lagos has 42 new cases, followed by Plateau with 25 cases and Rivers with 16. Ebonyi State has 10 new confirmed cases. Abia, Ogun and the FCT have 9 each. Osun has 7, while Katsina and Kaduna have 6 new cases each. Other states are Ekiti and Taraba with 4 each, Edo 3. Anambra and Akwa Ibom states have 2 new cases each, while Kano has 1. With this development, Nigeria has 55,160 confirmed cases, out of which 43,231 have been treated and discharged, while 1,061 have died of the virus. That's the morning news. The program continues with Kingsley and Jummai after this break.
Development experts advocate investment in infrastructure to attain Nigeria's Vision 2050. Let's join Kunle Adeye for details.
One of the major antidotes needed to achieve a booming economy is the provision of modern infrastructure. Successes recorded by developed economies have been attributed to functional infrastructure laid down. A development economist, Professor Ken Ife, said the commitment by the federal government to improve on the country's infrastructure should be sustained to attain the country's various visions.
The infrastructure is a big one. And you know the various visions of Nigeria. 2050, our GDP will be 6.4 trillion. 2030 to be 1.64 trillion. You can never get near these figures if you're not investing in infrastructure.
He emphasized that this can also be achieved through a public-private partnership initiative. Let's now see the details of Monday's tradings on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. With business news, I'm Kunle Adeye.
Many thanks, Kunle, for the business package. Coming up next is newspaper review.
Well, this is newspaper review, and we're beginning with the Daily Trust newspaper. Just below the masthead, killings. This madness must stop. That's coming from the Sultan of Sokoto, and you find that story on page 8. Patients stranded, discharged prematurely as doctors begin nationwide strike. Find that story on page 37. Importers get 30 days to clear 164 abandoned containers. Details on page 16. And the bold headlines on the Daily Trust newspaper: fuel subsidy removal irreversible, electricity tariff hike necessary. That's coming from President Muhammadu Buhari. With riders, petrol subsidy guzzles 2.124.16 trillion naira under APC. All cheapest in Nigeria. That's coming from Lai Mohammed, Minister of Information. FG policies anti-masses attributed to Afenifere and CSO civil society organizations in Nigeria. And you see the picture story there. President Buhari in Niger Republic. President of Niger, Muhammadu Issoufou. President Buhari, second. President of Senegal, Macky Sall, third. And President of Guinea-Bissau, Umaru Ebolo, during the 57th ordinary session of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of States and Government in Niamey, Niger Republic, yesterday. And just below the picture story, Buhari warns West African leaders against tenure allegation. Buhari warns West African leaders against tenure allegation, and you find that story on page 4. North Central elders ask Buhari to sack civil service chiefs. You find details on page 4. 7-year-old girl murdered in Jos. Details on page 10. Yes, sir?
All right. We also have the Nation newspaper, and we begin from top to bottom. 774,000 jobs recruitment ends in 2 weeks. 774,000 jobs recruitment ends in 2 weeks. That's on page 7. Kano loses 2 billion naira properties to rainstorm. Homes destroyed in Zamfara. Details on page 34. Otom urges local input in budget preparation. And troops kill 5 terrorists in Borno attack. That's on page 6. And below the name flag, Edo 2020. That's the governorship election due in 11 days. We have 4 headlines there with the stories in greater detail on page 33. Thugs stay put at Assembly Complex. Obaseki, that's the incumbent governor, I will accept defeat if I lose fairly. PDP to opposition, stop contriving violence. And Nollywood star Elliot, NGOs and others support Izeyamu. No return to petrol and power subsidy, says federal government. And Buhari seeks understanding, private sector gives qualified support. And for the story there, you have a number of highlights. These are also mini riders. Says mass metering of consumers to begin. Oil deregulation started March 18th. Solar power for 5 million households. NEC, that's the Electricity Regulatory Commission, to prevent exploitation. 10 trillion naira spent on subsidy in 13 years and 1.7 trillion naira spent to bridge tariff shortfalls. And tariffs in Nigeria amongst lowest in West Africa. Killings must stop, say Sultan and Emirs. That's with regard to killings in the north, banditry, insurgency, and also the senseless killings as described in southern Kaduna. Doctors begin nationwide strike in Gige. Action unwarranted. And then you see the photograph there on the front page of the paper. The photograph says supporters and residents celebrating the Supreme Court victory with Kogi State Governor Yaya Bello at his Okene country home at the weekend. And inside is the photograph showing the governor surrounded by his supporters. Now, let's take a closer look at that photograph. And you're going to ask yourself, is coronavirus over? Take a closer look. If you zoom in, not just the inside, but the entire photograph itself. All right, if we have a clear focus of that, is coronavirus over? I recall Jumai,
yes,
the Secretary of the Government of the Federation, who is also chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, saying at some point that in a good number of cases, they had received little cooperation from subnational governments in terms of implementing the requisite rules to prevent further community spread of coronavirus. And not just the photograph that is inside. If we see the entire photograph, you're going to ask yourself, look, how many persons are you seeing in this photograph who are wearing face masks?
You can't even identify them.
Yeah, or even wearing face shields. This is a mass gathering in the country home of the governor. It seems a bit unfortunate that such could take place. In any case, we had always had issues with Kogi with regard to whether or not...
no COVID-19.
Yeah, whether it was COVID-19 and denial of the presence of COVID-19 and attacks. All right, so the other story, of course, says no return to petrol and power subsidy, says federal government. Buhari seeks understanding, mass metering of consumers to begin. We've had mass metering of consumers to begin a good number of times. And incidentally, on Good Morning Nigeria yesterday, that was the topic of our main conversation. With regard to what needs to be done. Estimated billing, which has been said, look, is unacceptable. And the federal government, through President Muhammadu Buhari, has now waived the 35% import duty levy on the importation of meters.
Yes.
So mass metering to begin. When will the mass metering begin, and when will people get their meters
all over the country?
That's right. That's one leg of it. There were a number of points that came up in the conversation yesterday, and I'm not going to go over those issues. We had the representative of AEDC, that's one of the discos. We had the former chairman of NEC, Sam Amadi, and the former managing director of the bulk electricity trader, plus, of course, the coordinator of Electricity Consumers Association in the country. We have a long haul to go with regard to attaining efficiency in the electricity value chain. A lot has been done, but people are saying, look, if this is a service-based tariff, then of course they must have that service in order to pay the tariff.
Exactly.
That's right. So, and the other leg when it said no return to petrol and power subsidy, we've already discussed power. Petrol, the key issue is, yes, Nigerians are willing to pay the right amount on the basis of the regulation. If we recall, for many years now, diesel, that's AG, automotive gas oil, has been deregulated. And the prices of diesel normally will fluctuate depending on what is happening on the international market. But for petrol, the key issue is we know the immediate knock-on effect in terms of inflation, the rise in all kinds of goods, and the price of goods and services. But more essentially, the issue that is also on the table is, if we say no going back on the removal of petrol subsidy, there should also be no going back on ensuring that the nation's 4 refineries are working.
And it has gotten so much money and it's still there. We are importing petrol, actually.
That's right.
So I don't think that should be acceptable. If we're supposed to pay that amount of money, we should get services rendered properly. And Kingsley, something on the Daily Trust newspaper. Importers get 30 days to clear 164 abandoned containers from the Daily Trust newspaper. 164 abandoned containers. So how can they clear it if it has been abandoned?
Well, it means let the owners come. This is preliminary to auctioning.
Yes.
Yeah, they've given the deadline. If those whose containers remain there haven't come to clear them, then of course the containers will be auctioned quite clearly. But perhaps there had been delays arising from COVID-19, even though the ports were said to be operational. And then you have all kinds of bottlenecks around. I mean, it depends on where the containers are located. If it's Apapa and Tink, and everybody knows how challenging it is to commute in that particular location. But it is the business of the importers and the clearing and forwarding agents to follow up accordingly. If they don't want to lose what is in the containers, then they follow up expeditiously to ensure that they are cleared. Otherwise, the containers will be auctioned.
And a disturbing trend there, patients stranded, discharged prematurely as doctors begin nationwide strike.
Well, that's the National Association of Resident Doctors. Again, the Honorable Minister of Labour and Employment says that the action is unwarranted.
Yes, it is.
Because conciliation is ongoing and the matters are not such that cannot be resolved. But in addition to what we are seeing now with regard to the Association of Resident Doctors, it appears that as soon as they are done with this, they may have to then face the strike action already called by JOHESU, that's the other health workers. They have given their notice to begin their own strike, I believe, sometime next week. The question to ask is, how can the country continue to reel from one industrial action to the other? Some of them have been so prolonged, including ASU, for instance. And whenever they call it off, they say, oh, the strike is suspended. At some point, we will resume. I think that perhaps some ultimate solution has to be found to some of these issues and deal with them before they get out of control.
Because in this moment that we are in, I don't think, doctors have sworn to save lives. And if in this moment of COVID-19, they go on strike, what happens?
The consequences are already there. I mean, that's for those who go to public hospitals. They say they've been turned back.
Yes,
and
they've been discharged.
Yeah, some of them have been discharged. I mean, I recall there was one of these industrial actions sometime in 2014. I mean, there was a gentleman whom I knew very well. He lost his life in Benin, at the University of Benin Teaching Hospital. They were on strike in 2014, and he never recovered. So there are fatalities arising from all of these issues. We know that they have good grounds, to seek better conditions of service, to seek better work environment and equipment of their hospitals. But a strike is actually a weapon of last resort for workers. But it has turned out that, as we have seen in Nigeria, it's often a weapon of first resort.
Which is a very sad
development. So let's take a look at the editorial.
Yes. The editorial is coming from the Daily Sun newspaper, and it's talking about the concession of viable airport terminals. I'm going to read a little out of it. The move by the federal government to concession the terminals of 4 Nigerian international airports located in Abuja, Lagos, Kano, and Port Harcourt as part of its development plan is set to cause labor restiveness in the sector. Already, the Nigerian Labour Congress and some of the aviation unions have vowed to resist it, As a warning, the aviation workers shut the offices of the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria (FAN) in Lagos, Abuja, Kano and Port Harcourt on August 31st, 2020. And the editorial goes further to urge the federal government to review the plan and consider going for greenfield concession, where the concessionaire will acquire a land, build, operate and transfer the airports to the government. This arrangement would create more jobs during and after construction and drive competition in the sector.
The editorial, of course, is talking about the plan by the Ministry of Aviation to concession airport terminals, the 4 airports that are said to be most viable in the country. Murtala Muhammed Airport in Lagos, of course, the Abuja Airport, Kano, as well as Port Harcourt. And we have seen reports of the staff demonstrating and claiming that there will be job losses. Of course, there are labor issues to deal with when you have plans of this nature to concession. The editorial raises a number of significant points, but also the editorial, in my opinion, doesn't consider some other equally significant points. For one, the editorial says, look, MMA2, that's Murtala Muhammed Airport 2, that's a domestic airport in Lagos, was concession to Bicotney, and unfortunately that concession arrangement has been entangled in legal disputes. The editorial appropriately advises that there should be lessons to draw from that concession agreement, which is fine. But the editorial then says, look, why concession for viable airports? Why don't you ask potential developers to look for greenfield projects? You can't build airports all over the place in the first instance. And where the editorial says that they should acquire land and build, operate and transfer to the government, how much land does the federal government own? That's the question to ask, because by the provisions of the Land Use Act, land is entrusted in the governor of a state, so it belongs to a state government. Now, if a state government is not interested in concessioning land for an airport or in granting release for the construction of an airport, what happens? We know that a number of state governments have of course, embarked on the construction of airports, and some of those airports are already running. So to whom, therefore, is that advisory directed to say, go and have greenfield projects? And more importantly, the fact that those airports are viable now doesn't mean that the airports couldn't be made even more efficient and more profitable. You recall we discussed this about a week or so ago. What is the attitude to work? The federal government has tried, particularly under the ease of doing business. We saw the tremendous improvement at the terminal in Lagos, and also, I believe, here in Abuja. But if concessioning will make the airports much more profitable, why not? We saw what happened to Heathrow Airport. Heathrow Airport is not owned directly now by the British government. And we have seen the efficiency that has come to Heathrow Airport. So if more money is going to accrue from that, and of course it goes to the business owners as well as to the employees and invariably also to the government, why not?
Well, that's newspaper review for now. We'll take a break. When we return, our conversation begins. You're welcome back, and to begin our conversation, let's roll this background report put together by Abdul Malik Adu.
On January 11, 2010, PNID signed a gas supply and processing agreement with the Ministry of Petroleum Resources on behalf of the Nigerian government. Under the terms of agreement, PNID was to build and operate an accelerated gas development project to be located at Adiabo in Odupani local government area of Cross River State. The Nigerian government was to source for natural gas from oil mining lease 1, 2, 3 and 6, 7, operated by Adax Petroleum and supplied to PNID to refine into fuel sustainable for power generation in the country. Nigeria was expected to supply an initial volume of about 150 million cubic feet of gas per day. Eventually, it was to be ramped up to about 400 million cubic feet per day during the 20 years period. However, PNID alleged that after signing the agreement, the Nigerian government reneged on its obligation after negotiations were opened with the Cross River State government for allocation of land for the project. PNID said the failure to construct the pipeline system to supply the gas frustrated the construction of the gas project, thereby depriving it of the potential benefit from over 20 years' worth of gas supplies. In August 2012, PNID served the Nigerian government a request for arbitration. However, Nigeria argued before the tribunal that the failure of PNID to acquire the site and build gas processing facilities was a fundamental breach, and that no gas could be delivered until this has been done. But the tribunal ruled that Nigerians' obligation under Article 6B were not conditional upon PNID having constructed the gas processing facilities. In July 2015, the arbitral tribunal found that Nigeria had repudiated its obligation under the GSPA and the PNID had been entitled to accept the repudiation and claim damages for breach. Consequently, the tribunal ordered Nigeria to pay PNID $10 billion for damages, including interest. Following this arbitrary award, Nigeria appealed the judgment and provided sufficient evidence that the entire process was marred with malpractice and bribery. In its judgment, the court ruled that Nigeria has established a prima facie case that the gas supply and processing was procured by bribes and paid to insiders as part of a larger scam to defraud Nigeria and grant Nigeria an extension of time and relief from sanctions. Experts say the judgment is a victory for Nigerians and the President Muhammadu Buhari-led administration, whose determination and commitment ensured that Nigeria is not ripped off by a foreign company and has introduced a new philosophy to governance as decisions and policies are made for the overall interest of the people. On Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss matters arising on the PNID ruling.
All right, thank you very much for that backgrounder. We have with us here in the studios to discuss this issue, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, Honorable Minister of Information and Culture. Honorable Minister, delighted to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning.
All right. Also here with us, Niye Akinsiju, who is an investment and financial analyst, one of our regular guests on Good Morning Nigeria. Niye, pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure.
Okay, just as a reminder, Honorable Minister, I recall that sometime last year on Good Morning Nigeria, we hosted you when there were a lot of issues pertaining to the PNID case, as we may conveniently refer to it. And since then, a lot has happened, but the latest, of course, being the decision last week by the UK court granting an extension of time for Nigeria to appeal the judgment or the enforcement of the arbitral award in favor of PNID. Now, give us again what the feeling is from the Nigerian government at this time.
Well, I think the recent judgment which permitted Nigeria to appeal the arbitration award and at the same time stay the execution is a big victory for Nigeria. It is a big victory for our belief in ourselves, a big victory for our commitment to the rule of law. You see, from the beginning, we were not under any doubt that the PNID contract was a scam. There was absolutely no intention on the part of PNID to honor the obligation, and we found the arbitration award quite surprising. So we challenged it. I want to seize the opportunity to commend the tenacity of purpose of the Attorney General of the Federation. But more importantly, I think the PNID case is a case study on how various ministries and MDAs can collaborate to achieve the purpose of saving the nation. I say this because, yes, it is true that it is the lawyers that argue the case. Of Foreign Affairs, Attorney General's Office, the CBN, the IG, and the FCC, because we are all on the same page that this arbitration award is fraudulent, must be challenged, and we all played our roles. On the part of Minister of Information, we are convinced from day one that this matter will be won in two courts, one court of law and the other the court of public opinion. So we set out from day one to change the narrative. And the first step we took was to go to Lagos and address investors, diplomats, captains of industry, that they should not be alarmed by this award, that we are going to overturn it, and that they should not disinvest from Nigeria. I want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Bismarck Rewani in particular, who coordinated the meeting on our behalf in Lagos, where we had virtually every bank MDs, virtually every chairman of bank, virtually every chairman of bank, virtually every major investor, diplomat at that briefing. And of course, I was accompanied by the Minister of Finance, the CBN Governor, the President of the Attorney General. But that's where we started. Then we left there and came back here, if you remember, and we started a series of media appearances, press conferences, to actually tell Nigerians that this is a scam. It is that is being aided by some greedy, unpatriotic Nigerians, but that we are going to test it, in court. And in an opposite move, myself, the Attorney General of the Federation, the IG, the Chairman of AFCC, the CBN Governor, we moved to London, and we made the rounds of about 20 major media outlets: CNN, Al Jazeera, Reuters, Financial Times, British BBC, and and think tanks such as the Royal African Society, the Red Lion, chambers, to put across our case and change the narrative that this is not a case of an honest businessman that whose conduct was frustrated, but rather from the beginning, this was a case that was made in fraud. So we all feel very relieved. We all feel very fulfilled that after about a year of legal tussles, changing of narrative, that victory has come our way. Because you must not forget that about this time last year, the whole country was nervous because the PNID hired very powerful publicists, and they were already threatening that they are going to seize our assets abroad. Any Nigerian crude going abroad will be seized, and it took a lot of focus on the part of the federal government to pursue this case to the logical conclusion. As we are today, two things are clear. The sword of Damocles is no longer over our head, and the judge said Nigeria has been able to make a strong case of fraud, and therefore is giving us permission to appeal the arbitration award, and at the same time, lifting the sanction. Because don't forget, it was not just an arbitration award; it had been converted into a judgment of court. So I think I want to stop here for the time being, but you can see the sense of euphoria on the part of government, because what would have been seized would amount to almost 1/3 of our entire, foreign reserve. So it's not. I think it's a case that should be celebrated. Oh yes, we are not yet out of the woods, But we are being given a second chance to go back and prove fraud. And I believe that with the competence, termination of the Attorney General's office, that would be an easier cake.
Okay, with all, I'm still going to stay with you, with all the media coverage you had, going to London and all that, would you say it sort of contributed to the respite we seem to have in the case now?
Well, I want to believe that, you see, judges are also human. And they are not immune to what is going on around them. I don't want to speak for the Attorney General because he's in a better position, to discuss the fine points of law. But I believe that, like I said before, from day one, we were of the firm opinion that the matter will be decided in two courts. One is court of law, one is court of public opinion. And we, I believe, with all some modesty, we succeeded in changing the narrative. That before then, it was Nigeria is a country of crooks. But we turned the tables to say, no, look at the background of these people. They came to Nigeria, they did not invest a penny in Nigeria, even by their own admission. They said they invested $40 million US. How does $40 million US translate to $6.6 billion in damages? And then with interest ballooned to $9.6 billion. And we were paying interest was $1.2 million every day. So you see, we had to convince the world that this is not an ordinary kind of thing. Whether that influenced the judges or not, I cannot say. But at least we succeeded in getting the narrative changed and in favor of Nigeria. So from being the crook, or from being the country that does not respect agreements, we became the victims. And I think that was very important.
All right, Honorable Minister, thank you. Well, let's bring in now Nia Kinsiju, who is an investment and financial analyst. Nia, we are here talking about investment and financial consequences. So let me just leave you to express your own views about this whole transaction before we get into the nitty-gritty of what the consequences might have been.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think at the core of this matter, it's the negative effects, of partnership. We talk about PPP always without understanding, the corrosive influence of a partnership that is not properly motivated, and that has not gone through process of due process, as it were. This is the outcome of a partner that offered what I call a sweetheart deal. Sweetheart deal to the extent that Nigeria, the partner, had actually been involved in businesses in Nigeria before then, had understood our environment, has relationship linkages with people in government up to the State House at that time, and saw an opportunity to hit it big without investing. And it was apparent from the registration of that company, PID, in the British Virgin Islands in 2006. It was actually tapping into the aspiration of the then government, to establish thermal power plants through the NIPP and all that. So the major influence behind the company, behind PIP and ID, Michael Quinn, claimed that it put together a feasibility study, did drawings, and of course contracted engineers to put together the plant. The plant was a plant, to process wet gas into lean gas, and of course extract condensates, propylene, and butane from the wet gas. It sounds so good, and offered this to the Nigerian government through the Ministry of Petroleum Resources. And the idea was to process this gas, this wet gas, and give it, supply to Nigeria free of charge. You know, out of the Nigeria would give him or supply him with 150 million standard cubic feet of wet gas a day, and after extracting, the company PID would take natural gas liquid, processed, and then the lean dry gas would be given back to Nigeria free of charge. Now, when you look at such, the first thing is when a partner decides to give you a product free of charge, you need to start asking what exactly are involved. Especially at a time when this person had said he would build a plant, and this plant, as it were, had no address. Because what was instructive in the agreement, as it were, before the agreement was signed, there was an MOU. And you think that a dialogue or negotiation on this project that started in 2007. And when I got involved in investigating this, what I realized was that McQueen claimed that he had spent the $40 million, as it were, before getting in touch with the Ministry of Petroleum Resources. So it was not on cue, you know. It was not on the pushing of the Ministry of Petroleum Resources that he went to spend that. It was supposed to be a preliminary study, you know, of how this thing can be done in Nigeria. Then he contacted the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, and negotiations started, I think, effectively in 2008. Between 2008 and 2009, that they were negotiating with the Petroleum Resources Ministry, there was no mention of the source, you know, of the supply. It was this same McQueen that came forward to suggest that the main source of that wet gas was Adex Petroleum OML 123 in the Calabar area, offshore Calabar. Interestingly, when they contacted Adex, just some months, because the agreement was signed in January 2010, they contacted Adex in September 2009. And Adex had actually declared the fact that they could not provide that quantum, you know, of wet gas. Because what they had, you know, the estimate they had was about 163 million, you know, standard cubic feet of gas a day, to which they had to re-inject 63, you know, per million standard cubic into their own well. So that they could not provide that. Yet, that same agreement went on, you know, to be signed. But most interestingly, the gas that was supposed to be piped from that field to a supposed plant.
Without an address.
Without an address. As at that time, there was no mention when sometimes in 2009 when an MOU was signed between the Ministry of Petroleum Resources and this company, there was specifically no address. There was no mention of processes ongoing to acquire land. It wasn't until after the agreement had been signed in January 2010 that the managers of the company informed that they applied to the Cross River government, you know, for land in February 2010, 1 month precisely after an agreement had been signed. You would expect that agreement would actually substantially carry the address and the address of the the address of the plant, as it were, but it did not, and that struck me. No mention of it in the agreement, and most instructively is the fact that they deliberately asked for the component, the chemical component of the wet gas that would be sourced from the Adex petroleum field.
Was that what raised the red flag for you?
Yes, that was because if you are signing an agreement, an MOU from the MOU, the two parties are talking about their responsibilities and duties in that agreement, and the person that is offering to offer a service free of charge does not have an address, does not have a plant, where this the pipe, will land. Now, most distressful was that in the agreement, they also noted that they were going to pipe in phase one. The phase one will start from Adanga to Calabar, but that the second phase, which is on OML 63, managed by ExxonMobil, is about 70 kilometers to Adanga. They offered, to pipe, to extend the pipeline from Adanga to that point, a 70 kilometers pipeline. For God's sake, free of charge. And I was like, no, this cannot be a business. No matter your profits, as it were, from a project, it is not possible to keep offering your services free of charge. This is merely to motivate, the other party to quickly sign this thing. And of course, what the other party, those who constituted the other party, must also have been motivated by some other means, perhaps bigger than the nationalistic, patriotic means, as it were. So what I'm trying to say eventually is that the loopholes were clear, and that if we convert the sequence of activities into a storyboard, it was obvious, that fraud was intended from day one, of the initiation of the agreement, as it were.
Okay, Casey.
All right, Nave, thank you very much. We'll return to you to drill into some other aspects of investment decisions, either on a PPP level or indeed within government circles. We have the pleasure of also welcoming now to this conversation the Attorney General of the Federation and Honorable Minister of Justice, Learned Senior Advocate Abubakar Malami. Senior Advocate, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
My great pleasure. Good morning.
We already have Alhaji Lai Mohammed, your colleague, who is Minister of Information and Culture, has given its own background with regard to the role that his ministry and indeed several other ministries played collaboratively, one to change the narrative and then, of course, to get dealing with the nitty-gritty of the legal issues. It's already considered, of course, that you have further details, further and better particulars, as you would say in law, with regard to this particular matter. But first, again, let's provide a context, Learned Attorney General of the Federation. We know that already the case has, as it were, many branches. What we refer to as the P&ID case has many branches. The heartwarming news came last week with the decision of a court in England granting Nigeria leave to appeal out of time and a stay of execution of the arbitral award of $9.6 billion US. So give us a sense of what the issues are and where we are at the moment.
Well, as the component of the issues, if I am to take you perhaps back, not assessing the background that has been stated, is let me start by way of being in agreement completely with the submissions made, with particular reference to the fact that P&ID contractual agreement was indeed a contract that was not intended to be, that was originally not intended to be executed. I have an issue. I'm entirely in agreement with that proposition. Why? First, this is an agreement that was signed between Federal Ministry of Petroleum Resources and P&ID for the supply of wet gas by Petroleum Affairs Ministry to P&ID for it to be processed to lean gas for power generation purposes, among others. But the question that calls for determination first is whether Federal Ministry of Petroleum indeed has the gas to supply? The answer is clear. The provision of gas is not within the mandate, it's not within the capacity, and it is not within the within the capacity of Petroleum Affairs Ministry. It is indeed a function of oil and gas companies. Oil and gas companies, ADAX, for example, and ExxonMobil, that were expected to provide the lean gas through a pipeline that was intended to be put in place. But the point of interest arising therefrom is that ADAX and ExxonMobil were never parties to the agreement ab initio. So the issue is, can you provide what you do not have? Can the Petroleum Affairs Ministry provide a lean gas that it does not have? And taking into consideration that the ExxonMobil, ADAX, were never parties to a contract. If indeed it was a contract designed to be executed ab initio, then it is only logical that it should be a tripartite contract involving three parties: the Petroleum Affairs Ministry, ADAX and Mobil on the other part, and indeed the P&ID. But the fact that you are now trying to shave someone's head while he is indeed not presently available for the shaving create an impression expressly that there are certain fraudulent undertones right from the onset. Now, this was the background against which the contract was signed between Petroleum Affairs Ministry and P&ID, without ExxonMobil and ADAX being part and parcel of the agreement, even when ExxonMobil and ADAX were expected to provide the desired lean gas from their facilities. Now, the agreement was eventually signed in 2010, and then as of 2012, the issue of breaches, purported breach, was raised by P&ID. On which ground? On the ground that no pipeline was put in place by Federal Ministry of Petroleum to a point, expected point of installation of the plant. But the issue is, where was the point? P&ID has not acquired a landed asset in rivers where the plant was expected to be put in place. P&ID has not acquired the necessary permits and approvals from Department of Petroleum Resources that will enable it to put in place the plant. P&ID has not shown any financial strength and capacity for the acquisition of the plant internationally, much less of having it put in place in rivers. So, but yet, notwithstanding these facts, the P&ID now commenced an arbitration proceedings on the allegation that Federal Ministry of Petroleum Resources refused first to provide the pipeline required to the purported point of installation. Two, Petroleum Affairs Ministry did not as well provide the gas, which ordinarily it couldn't have. So, at the end of the day, they now instituted an arbitral proceeding. And then, shortly after 2010, that was precisely in 2012, the arbitral proceedings commenced. And eventually, necessary processes, arbitral process in terms of documentation, were exchanged by the parties. Ministry of Petroleum Resources represented, P&ID represented, and among the point of further interest, in the course of arbitral proceeding, there existed a witness statement of a witness that died long before the proceedings commenced. Long before the idea of commencement of arbitration was raised, a witness statement was part of the statements that were presented for the consideration of the Court of Arbitration to look into and rely upon for the purpose of declaring a liability against Nigerian state. So, as at the time the government of President Muhammadu Buhari came in place, just a month or two thereabout, there was already determination of the arbitral proceedings, and Nigeria was adjudged liable and within the region of around 6.6 billion dollars. But the point of interest is not only the liability, but Nigeria was adjudged equally liable in interest in the sum of over $1 million per day to continue running until after the settlement of the arbitral award. And that was the point at which the government of President Muhammadu Buhari came on board and took immediate steps. One, looking at the possibility, one component of it was the possibility of perhaps negotiating the arbitral award down, taking into consideration that there was nothing available on the ground to support the government in arriving at a decision one way or the other as to whether indeed there existed fraud, underhand dealings, corruption, and compromises in processes and procedure. Now, even before the government came on board, the previous government had indeed engaged P&ID in negotiations and were negotiating within the region of $801 or so million by way of out-of-court settlement. But then the time was running against them until the government of President Muhammadu Buhari was eventually sworn into office. So our immediate steps was to assess and analyze the whole situation from the perspectives of the possible settlement arrangement, from the perspectives of perhaps analyzing the whole scenario to see into it, to look into it, examine them, and see whether indeed there was justification for settlement in the first place. And our reaction thereafter was, even if the settlement component should be given any consideration, but arising from certain variables that were revealed, that manifested, we felt there were certain procedural compromises. And those compromises, we took steps now to analyze the contract. Some of the major revelations arising therefrom were the fact that, one, P&ID had not taken steps to acquire the land on which the facility was to be put in place. Two, P&ID had not taken steps to now obtain necessary permits, necessary approvals, or perhaps even the presentation of necessary feasibility before the Department of Petroleum Resources that could have allowed the company to put in place the facility. Three, the financial capacity of P&ID was as well suspect. Four, the agreement in its own right had not brought in ADAX and ExxonMobil that were expected to be the providers of the lean gas into consideration. So it was a bilateral and as against a tripartite agreement. An agreement of this nature should bring together all the parties of interest, the provider of the gas, the government agency involved, and indeed perhaps in the circumstances, the P&ID, if you indeed are not bringing the state that was expected to provide the land, on board. So apparently it was a bilateral agreement involving Ministry of Petroleum Resources only, and indeed P&ID now overlooking or sidestepping the ExxonMobil and indeed ADAX that were expected to be the providers of the lean gas. So more so, limited perhaps assessment of the whole situation does not exhibit or establish a financial capacity on the part of ExxonMobil. And their problem was further found on the part of P&ID. And their financial capacity was further established to have been suspicious, arising from additional revelations that indeed the $40 million they claim to have invested were indeed monies obtained from a Nigerian of interest, and he was along the line shortchanged by P&ID, a Nigerian provided the financial muscle required for the purpose of the project. They now took money from the Nigerian with an understanding that his company will be used for the purpose of acquisition of necessary permits, for the purpose of establishment of the facility, and yet after collecting that money from a Nigerian, he was as well sidelined, and then they now use part of the money to perhaps invest minimal part of it while taking away substantial part of it out of Nigerian state without even paying the undertone necessary taxes associated with it. So perhaps our psyche was affected by the possibility of fraud arising therefrom. And then we now decided not only to engage in negotiations, but perhaps to see what we can do in terms of affording protection to the Nigerian assets locally and internationally, which they were targeting to attach for the purpose of execution of the arbitral award. What did we then do? We now decided to engage lawyers to now ensure at the end of the day that the enforcement they were aggressively pursuing internationally was stopped. And then we now engaged a company by name Curtis and instructed them to look at the possibility of ensuring that no enforcement was carried out against the Nigerian asset locally or internationally. But then, looking further into the limited revelations as it relates to the enforcement, we now come to understand that there were a lot of financial, perhaps, misdeeds involving the parties, both locally and internationally. And then a suspicion now arose that indeed fee and ID originally was a product of fraudulent dealings among the parties, fraudulent compromises among the parties, and indeed breaches of processes and procedure, taking into consideration that all the required procedure relating to the acquisition of land, procedure relating to permits and approvals from the Department of Petroleum Affairs Ministry, procedure relating to the fact that not even the agreement was presented before the Office of the Attorney General for vetting, which is an office that is saddled with the responsibility of vetting agreements involving the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for the purpose of ensuring that the interest of government is adequately protected, looking into the existing and prevailing clauses in the agreement. A situation whereby as well, not even the Federal Executive Council was accorded an opportunity to look into, to deliberate and look into the agreement for the purpose of approving them. So a lot of processes compromises, a lot of procedural compromises, a lot of misgivings apparent that could now suggest or perhaps support the reasonable ground for suspicion of the commission of an offense, or perhaps maybe of compromises. So we now took a further decision that there is need now to attack the agreement in its own right, to attack the award in its own right. But our major predicament ordinarily was this is a process that you need to present before the court shortly after the award. And in most jurisdictions, it is within the region of 3 months. And we are here now, perhaps sleeping and going into slumber for over a period of 6 or 5 years, which is unprecedented for you now to now approach a court and say, look, I have been sleeping for a period of over 6 years. I am now here seeking for your discretion now to reopen the case for the purpose of certain consideration. But notwithstanding, we were hopeful on the ground that we were indeed cheated. The agreement was fraudulent, an agreement that now makes Nigeria liable in a financial sense, liabilities that will now bring down entirely the economic structure of the Nigerian state, entirely in respect of an award that has the capacity to deprive Nigeria of any further investment in budgetary sense, in educational and perhaps sense. It is an award that is far more greater than the entire budgetary provision of Nigerian state as it relates to health and education combined. So we felt, no, it couldn't fly. We have to make extensive efforts. And that is how a collaborative approach to it was sanctioned by the presidency, and we were directed to now look at the possibility. So that is where the collaborative approach to it now arose, a collaboration between the Ministry of Justice, a collaboration with the Ministry of Information, the Office of the Inspector General of Police, the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Ministry of Finance, EFCC, among and other institutions of interest that are in one way or the other, inclusive of the Foreign Affairs Ministry that was saddled with the responsibility of providing the associated support services, inclusive of the Secretariat, taking into consideration that we have to find our way to foreign countries of establishing our case. So eventually, at the end of the day, we now instituted a further action seeking for extension of time. One, stay of execution of the order of the payment of the around 9 billion naira as it then were, and then
$9 billion.
sorry, $9 billion. Being Nigerian, I'm more
a lot of money. It can actually tear a big hole in
Nigerian, I'm more conversant with naira. So
you
sorry
know,
about
from
that.
the way you're talking, I feel as if I'm in the court already, and I'm really, really scared for the people who stand against you.
Yeah.
You know, so with all these arguments and all these facts you've brought together,
Sorry,
yes.
Just before that, he was now about to land
Yes.
to say the processes that they have taken, what the results have been.
Yes. So initially, we decided to now provide a kind of safety for the national assets. And then the starting point was to ensure that no enforcement is carried out. And then we have an order for enforcement. We applied for an order for stay of execution. The order was reluctantly granted by the court then on the condition that we were to pay $200 million cash deposit before the court. Then we equally felt that the order for conditional payment was unjustified, and then we appealed against it, seeking for the variation of the order, that we were not willing and ready to deposit that amount, because in case we do, and Fee and ID now eventually gets the $200 million, I think that could be the end of it, taking into consideration the unfolding revelations. So we've appealed against the order for conditional order for deposit, and then we now turn around to initiate the process of seeking for extension of time within which to have the agreement and indeed the entire arbitral award set aside. But then, that application is unprecedented, taking into consideration the time limitation. You are expected perhaps at most to present such reconsideration within 3 months. And then here we are, after 6 years, now coming back to the court, seeking the discretion of the court to allow us.
Outside the limit.
Long after the limit. So at the end of the day, we were lucky. The court now looks into the prevailing evidence. First, we equally applied before the court while our application was being considered to allow us leave to embark on international investigation of the parties of interest. And that investigation reveals that there were certain financial underhands relating to P&ID and some officials of government. And the sum of around 301 million naira then.
Is it million naira?
It's million naira.
Okay.
It's million naira in case I was mistaken. But in stating a contrary currency before now. But the precise amount that was established to have changed hands, then that was between imagine the 301 million naira in 2010 was established through our investigative exposition in other jurisdictions. And now we equally, with that investigation at hand, we equally support our case. And the court now agree with us that we were not only entitled to extension of time within which to apply for the setting aside of the entire award for the nullification of the agreement, but then the court was convinced that there was strong revelations in the direction of fraud, compromises, and indeed corrupt practices among officials of government and P&ID. And indeed, there is strong suspicion that P&ID contract was a product of fraud, compromises, corruption, and certain underhand dealings between the officials of government and P&ID.
So what does that say about the level of transparency and adherence to regulatory award of contracts in the country? Since we've arrived at a prima facie case now, what does it mean?
The logical conclusion arising therefrom is the fact remains that compromises breaches of processes and procedure, underhand dealings, financial and otherwise, were the order of the day as at the time the government of President Muhammadu Buhari came on board, and then the liability we are now suffering, we are now laboring to set aside, was indeed a liability that is rooted in impunity and infractions and breaches of processes and procedure, which one can rightly state that were the order of the day before the government of President Muhammadu Buhari came on board.
All right, Elijah Muhammad, you are itching to say something. Yes. I mean, the revelations are mind-boggling to those who are unfamiliar with the details.
I kept saying, wow, wow, wow.
Remember, just before the Honorable Attorney General came in, I said he will be in a better position to actually give us the a kind of forensic audit of the saga. Now, about the one point where I want to collaborate with the Honorable Attorney General is the area of collaboration. Virtually every ministry mentioned or department played a very crucial role in our achieving the success that we're all celebrating today. And I must not fail to mention the collaboration of the Nigerian police. The Nigerian police went behind to really dig into the background of every character involved in the transaction, including the Nigerian businessman that the Attorney General mentioned, who was actually also a victim. As a matter of fact, he was the one that invited P&ID into Nigeria for this same gas process agreement. He was the one that financed and paid every penny on the way. But the moment the P&ID secured the contract, jettisoned the businessman, and he never got to know about development until when we were going back to court. And the Nigerian police did a very diligent job, exposed this, and put this part of the narrative that we use very convincingly in changing the perception of the public about this particular case. And of course the EFCC on its own part too actually did prosecute and got convicted some of the characters involved, both Nigerians and non-Nigerians. And I think this is what has really helped our case. And so I was not surprised when the judge said Nigeria has made a strong case of fraud and given us this second chance not only to appeal the arbitration award, but at the same time lift the sanction against us. And I am particularly excited that this administration, we do not work in silos. Yes, this is purely a legal matter, but you can imagine all the people that contributed to this. The CBN, of course, which will be the CBN took at the highest risk probably, because if they are going to attach anybody's money, it will be our money in our foreign reserve. That they were very, of course, they came in very strongly. The Nigerian police came in very strongly. The EFCC, of course, Attorney General's office, of course, that is their own. It's their own business. The Ministry of Information and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that provide the Secretariat and all the support in the UK. So this is what excites me, the sense of commitment, the sense of oneness of the administration.
All right, Elijah Mohammed, thank you very much. I mean, quite clearly, anyone listening to these stories and the consequences, that's to say in terms of the knock-on effect, would agree that this is a fine example of interministerial cooperation, interagency cooperation, and as the Honorable Minister of Information said, the less agencies work in silos, the much better it will be. But Honorable Attorney General of the Federation, this is one giant step, but it's not the end of the journey. What next?
Well, it's not the end of the journey, but perhaps the major point of interest that I think the Nigerian public should know is the fact that there is indeed a strong anticipation and expectation of the light at the end of the tunnel. We have been seeing some semblance of light along the way.
Flashes of light.
Flashes of light along the way. We have seen a flash that translated to stay of enforcement, of execution of the award by way of stopping the attachment of the Nigerian assets. We have seen a flash that translated to a further variation of the order, a condition for the stay, which was saving the Nigerian state the trouble of making a cash deposit of 200 million pounds. We have seen a flash of light that translated to the extension of time for Nigerian state to come over, revisit the proceedings, present evidence of fraud, present evidence of corruption, present evidence of material misrepresentation, among others. And we have seen a light, a logical deductions arising from the judgment that now establishes that the court is in substantial agreement with the Nigerian state that there are a greater possibility of establishing a case of corruption, a case of fraud. We have seen the flashes that gave us the go-ahead, that gave us the nod to embark on international investigation with particular reference to exposing the financial inducements as the basis of the P&ID agreement that was executed. So it was indeed flashes of successes. And then what next is the consolidation, working extraordinarily hard to consolidate on these flashes by way of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And that light we are targeting to see at the end of the day is to establish fraud, is to establish corruption, is to establish material and substantial misrepresentation of facts, is to establish criminal conspiracy, and then is to establish breaches in processes and procedure, and at the end of the day have the entire award set aside, have the agreement nullified. So that is the end, at the light at the end of the tunnel that we are praying and working fervently and extraordinarily hard to see, having seen the multiple flashes along the line.
Okay, Juma, I know you want to come. You are in court now, you said, but I just...
I'm in court.
That's right. Do we have a time delimitation within which we expect the appellate processes to commence and perhaps be concluded?
Well, in terms of time, honestly, the time factor element relating to the whole proceeding is something that is within the exclusive reserve of the court. So we await the time limitations, and then there is traditionally a conference that is supposed to take place between the lawyers and the court in terms of agreement on timelines within which parties are expected to conclude on the processes, on the preliminaries that will now see to the fixation of time. So without that conference taking place, it will be premature for me to conclude. But then one thing that is certain is not a process that is expected to protract so long.
Okay, Honorable Minister, thank you. We'll take a break now. When we return, the conversation continues. we've been having some very interesting conversation, enlightening and educative on the PNID case. I would like to bring in Ni Akinsuju now, an investment and financial analyst, to the conversation. What does this say, for our businesses, our transactions with other entities, especially foreign firms, from all you've heard from the Attorney General of the Federation, bringing facts to the ground on why we should fight this PNID case to the logical conclusion?
Yeah, as I noted in my opening remarks, it revolves around the issues of PPP. And don't forget that in recent times, public-private partnership concept had become so popular in Nigeria. And most financial investment experts would suggest this platform as perhaps the cheapest possible relationship with sovereign entities, in providing utilities and other forms of infrastructure. But the truth of the matter is that you have vultures, you have what I call hyenas going around in the cloak, of innocence, and of course providing sweetening deals, to sovereign entities. And it's not in Nigeria alone; it's across the world. There are people who are expert at this, who especially tempt developing countries, into such deals, especially when a deal has to do with provision of a service free of charge. I think the first thing is for whoever is involved, to start due diligence, on the provider of such deal, because in most cases it's a trap being set for that entity. So for Nigerians, especially as we aspire to increase our stock of infrastructure, there is a need when we are going into partnership with any entity. And it is not just about unknown. It has to do with very known names. It's not limited to unknown names. It has to do with very known names. We have to do our due diligence. Then secondly, when we are also going into this form of relationship, the important thing is to always look at the portfolio of the person or the entities involved in offering this kind of services. No matter how diligent a business is, if you conduct a portfolio due diligence, you will always locate, the kind of interaction that company has been involved in historically. And that will tell you, the capacity and, of course, the tendency.
Are we sufficiently resourced, even patient enough to undertake such, shall we say, forensic due diligence? Because sometimes, as you'll find occasionally, that we tend to swallow hook, line, and sinker materials and information that come from outside the country. Do we, as financial experts or investment experts, have that capacity to go behind, or as we say in law, to lift the veil on this particular entities promising you sweetheart deals?
I think we have. At my own level, when this news first broke in 2018, and I saw a flow of press statements, coming out from PNID, and I observed a number of media houses in Nigeria pushing, that argument, and it was, the argument was being pushed principally from the point of view, of PNID. And I decided, okay, let us look at what is on here. The first thing I observed was the person that was signing that statement was Michael Quinn. Now, I related to the witness statement, and of course, some of the proceedings, reading records of the arbitration. By 2014, 2015, thereabout, Michael Quinn was late, and here we are in 2018. This same Michael Quinn was signing press statements in the name of PNID.
And the statements were being published.
Were being published by renowned titles in Nigeria.
Yes.
So I was like, no, something is wrong
so was
somewhere.
So was signing the press statements? Was it a ghost?
Exactly. So then, secondly, I tracked an hedge fund in the US who had bought 25% on the tail of PNID securing that judgment.
Already.
Bought 25% of the value of P&ID with promises that they would fund, the recoveries and, of course, the other sanctions as provided in the ruling. And when I saw that, I know now this matter had been internationalized. It is more or less what you call global mercantilism. So if we had not approached this, and I must commend the Attorney General, I think he's not also giving himself enough credit. In truth, you would, if you do a reading of proceedings between 2012, and I think I need to raise this, that contract was signed January 11, 2010. By January 13, same 2010, 2 days after, Mr. Quinn wrote to the NNPC, to the Petroleum Ministry, that he was ready for everything. He was ready to take off, that the finances were ready, his land were ready, and he had moved in expertise.
False misrepresentation.
And there was nothing on ground.
And I was like, why would you sign a contract on a Monday, for instance, by Wednesday, you are reminding the other party to provide their own what they are supposed to provide as part of the contract, that you were ready. Now, any businessman will know that you don't activate a contract in that period. So essentially, the whole thing boils to the fact that the scam was internationalized. Like noted, we have a virtual company coming now, and even if you go online now, the kind of engagement, because a renowned public relations firm was also, contracted in the US with affiliates in the UK to also push this, this conversation, as it were.
The net is quite wide. Honorable Minister, your ministry has been touched, sensationalization of, reports, that does not go well with Nigeria. I don't know how it happens, actually. Can you shed more light on that?
Juma, this is precisely what we did. We took the gauntlet. We knew that this, like I said at the beginning of this case, that this matter will be won in 2 courts. One court of law and the other court of public opinion. That's why we went to the UK and visited and put our case across in at least 20 major outlets, led by the Attorney General, the Central Bank Governor, to plead our case. So that's how we were able to change the narrative. That's precisely what we did. Counter the policies that the P&ID had hired. And you see, we went to the extent of revealing even the background of the original owners of P&ID. One of them was a band manager just a few years ago in Ireland. So these are kind of things that we were able to unravel and to persuade the public that we are dealing with crooks, pure and simple. And this is why I keep saying that, you see, at times, perception is often more important than reality. And we must invest in perception a lot. Again, what I see about this case is that a lot will still come out in the open. Because the federal government is not the only victim of P&ID in Nigeria. But I agree with Mr. Kingsley that if proper due diligence had been done, and I also agree with the Attorney General that if not because people had an agenda and they were already compromised, a simple search, due diligence on P&ID would have revealed the kind of what person they are. This is a company with no physical address. This is a company with no track record anywhere
in the world.
This is a company that doesn't have a track record in gas, oil and gas, and yet came into Nigeria because it was an area where anything was possible in Nigeria. And this, I think, is the major difference between this administration and previous administrations. We are ready to interrogate and even bring the searchlight on our own selves. Now,
All right, Honorable Minister of Information, thank you very much. I just wonder why we are still on this. Attorney General, yes, there's the municipal leg of this, and then there is also the international leg. What happens to the Confederates?
Confederate with particular reference to the Nigerian state?
To the Nigerian side, the participants criminees.
Well, you see, arising from the investigation that was generated locally and internationally, it became clear and manifest that there are local compromises, local compromises, and then local in procedure and processes. So the question we asked further and we interrogated was who are the characters involved
in Nigeria?
In Nigeria. Talking, for example, of due diligence, it is only logical that when you are committing a nation to a contract that has economic implication, major economic dimension and implication, that it is only logical that due diligence must effectively be done. In terms of due diligence, for example, we have institutions like NIA. If you have to rely on institutional support for international due diligence, there must have been in existence evidence of engagement of NIA for the purpose of international due diligence component. Locally, we have DSS. They are equally saddled with such responsibilities, among others. The police play a role. Local police and Interpol. Other agencies, ICPC, EFCC, are all expected traditionally to provide due diligence that would assist the government in arriving at a decision one way or the other. But then the implication of what unfolded was that all these agencies were in no way involved. And if you are to approach the Federal Executive Council for the purpose of approval, it is only logical that a contract of that magnitude must first through the procurement process. And the Bureau for Public Procurement is equally saddled with the responsibilities of conducting a due diligence and providing the Federal Executive Council with a due diligence report, among others, and then indeed ensuring associated compliances, inclusive of the vetting on the company to ensure its financial standards, to ensure its historical antecedents, both in terms of skill, both in terms of capacity to deliver, both in terms of integrity, among others. But simply because right from the onset, the intention was not for the contract to be executed. All these processes were never allowed to be consummated, were never allowed to be carried out. So arising from the international investigations report that now came our way, we now took decision to ensure that there are consequences for wrongdoings. And that is how eventually we now initiated the process, a process which was never ever contemplated by previous government. The government of President Muhammadu Buhari took a decision to ensure that there are consequences for wrongdoing, and those elements that were in one way or the other involved in the act of wrongdoing, compromises in processes and procedure were investigated, charged, arraigned, and prosecuted. And then convictions in respect of some were indeed recorded. And the investigation is indeed ongoing as it is, taking into consideration the additional facts emerging arising from the investigation that remain consistent, that remain ongoing, and that is unfolding additional evidence, additional facts, and indeed we are taking steps locally to ensure that we do the needful by way of ensuring consequences for wrongdoings arising and associated with PNID.
So we're going to see more heads rolling soon. High-profile heads rolling?
Well, as far as heads rolling, I think I can certainly state that the possibility of multiple and uncountable heads rolling is there.
Okay, Honorable Minister, we'll now take Nigerians have sent in some tweets. They want to join the conversation. I'll begin with Ebenezer. The federal government must go all out for whoever is involved in the shenanigans of the PNID, regardless of highly placed such persons, who they are. Same way the PHCN deal was contracted to twist Nigeria is no different from the case with PNID. Let the federal government put all involved in prisons.
Titus Mondenok. Now, one wonders about the extreme greed in some individuals who will sell their souls to defraud the nation with foreigners. In some other claims, they would face the death penalty. I suggest that they be legally prosecuted and punished to deter others. That's exactly what the Attorney General of the Federation has just said.
And Mike Anyako tweets, Nigeria is an economist's nightmare in terms of process and industrial development. This was as a result of our age-long, archaic, stopgap approach to development. All the development plans we had over the years were not implemented by successive governments. There is no continuity in governance. That is why we should give kudos to the present administration for their steadfast in changing the narrative, the ease of doing business, the president's wooing of foreign investors, etc. will go a long way in total emancipation of our industries and employment creation.
This is Mutana Farouk with his tweet. Says President Muhammadu Buhari means well for Nigeria. The PNID case is one out of many anomalies which some Nigerians have committed against their own country in the past.
And first is Akimboyewa tweets, federal government's victory against PNID in UK court calls for celebration. The Nigerians who connived with PNID in what the UK judge described as a fraudulent scheme must face the full wrath of the law to deter other unpatriotic Nigerians from conniving with foreigners to fleece our country. It's a great disservice to ever think of awarding oil and gas contract to two Irish nationals who have little experience in oil and gas sector. Nigerians must celebrate our anti-corruption crusade for working hard to expose PNID fraudulent criminal activities against our country.
This is a tweet from Twitter handle Teddy B. It says, there's no point celebrating if justice is not served. Every single person involved in this PNID case should be tried and jailed and made public. That is what will give Nigerians joy, such that it will never happen again.
And Daily Jack Solomon tweets, we must commend the federal government for pursuing this case and to ensure that the English court approved Nigeria's request for an extension in its case against Ireland's Process and Industrial Development, PNID. We can't afford to lose this case. We can't afford to pay for the contract.
All right, we're on the home stretch of this conversation. Attorney General of the Federation, there are a number of lessons, of course, to learn from the PNID case. It's not concluded yet. Of course, we do know that there are a number of issues still outstanding. One that has been raised by some observers has to do with arbitral clauses in contracts. Ordinarily, the received legal wisdom has to do with less luchy contractors. But here we are, virtually, I mean, let me not say virtually because I have no access to the wide variety of contracts. Arbitration is often assigned to jurisdictions other than the local jurisdiction. What needs to be done with regard to this? There are many Nigerians, who are qualified arbitrators. When they write their qualifications, you see that fellow chartered institute of arbitration, Nigeria, fellow chartered institute of UK, XYZ. But arising from this and considering the huge costs that the Nigerian government is having to bear in dealing with this matter, what would that mean in terms of policy redirection?
Well, as at yesterday, I was discussing with the, with the principal officers in Federal Ministry of Justice toward the direction of looking at the possibility of developing a national policy on arbitration. And we are looking at multiple possibilities arising therefrom. But the bottom line, one, is to ensure that we save the cost. Two, ensure that the national interest is factored much more than any other consideration. And then three, to ensure at the end of the day that our arbitration processes, both in terms of structures, in terms of capacity, are indeed enhanced significantly to create a situation whereby we can favorably compete internationally. So perhaps in a couple of days, we'll come off with certain strategies that will see to the development and enhancement of our arbitration capacity, both in terms of structures, in terms of capacity building, and in terms of legal framework. So what we are looking at is the enhancement of the legal framework, to look at the possibility of coming up with legislations that are deliberately targeted at enhancing the arbitral processes and proceedings within the Nigerian state. But the true position of things is Nigeria is evolving as far as arbitration proceedings are concerned. Our laws, Arbitration and the Conciliation Act, is indeed a law that can stand the test of time in terms of quality, in terms of accommodation, in terms of investment attraction. So the other consideration is, what is it that we do by way of provision of political goodwill, which is a major driver and enabler of development of whatever legislation you have in place. So it is the intention of the Office of the Attorney General, and I have already instructed the kickstarting of development of a national arbitration policy, which will be presented to the Federal Executive Council for the consideration. Within the context of the development of national arbitration policy, it is our intention to look at the possibility of localizing and domiciling the arbitration process in respect of contracts that have larger local components. It is our intention to look at the existing legislations, to look at the possibility of enhancing them for the purpose of establishing the national interest as the major enabler of perhaps amendment to the existing legislation if the need for so doing arises. We are not outruling the possibility of bringing about executive orders to complement same if the need arises. So indeed, we are kind of looking at the possibility of having in place effective legal framework, having in place effective national policy, and having in place associated subsidiary legislations that will assist the process. But then I'm happy to report that arising from the evolution of the arbitration, as far as the Nigerian state is concerned, as it is, we have very efficient and well-equipped centers established in Lagos and a center in Abuja. And I think it is indeed a step in the right direction, and then we'll try as much as possible to localize what should be localized as far as the development of arbitration is concerned within the Nigerian state.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, Information, your final thoughts before we go?
Well, my final thought on the matter is that, well, yes, this is a very big victory for Nigeria, but at the same time, it also makes us more, why should be more careful about contracts, signing contracts, the issue of due diligence, because what transpired with the P&ID would have been impossible under this administration. Because if you bring a memo to council in the first instance, you must make full disclosure under this administration about the promoters of the companies, the sponsor of the company, and many memos have been declined on the basis of the fact that you have not disclosed the sponsors or promoters of the company. Some also, when the promoters or sponsors are disclosed, they raise red flags, and then such memos are stepped down. So it's all about transparency. But to me, more important is that this P&ID is a case study in interministerial collaboration and cooperation.
Thank you.
Honorable Minister, thank you very much. Juma,
Yes.
one of the points that we'll take away from this, we're not doing a newspaper review now, or we're not doing media review generally, is that the stories from the P&ID end appear to have dried up. After a while, what happened? Well, they're no longer driving their stories. Okay, so on that note, we'd like to thank our three guests who've been with us this morning. Nia Kinsiju, our regular guest, an investment and financial analyst. A delight having you this morning. We also would like to appreciate the learned Attorney General of the Federation, the Honorable Minister of Justice, Senior Advocate Abubakar Malami. Thank you very much for being with us, and congratulations on your victory for the country, and many more successes.
Thank you very much.
We also would like to appreciate the Honorable Minister of Information and Culture, Alhaji Lai Mohammed. Again, congratulations on your interministerial collaboration and what has played out so far with regard to the, shall we say, notorious P&ID case. All right. So,
Nigeria fought hard for it, and all Nigerians should be appreciated.
Yes. All right. So that does it for us today on Good Morning Nigeria. As always, we thank you for being with us. We're back tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, stay safe and be well. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Juma Yusuf. You have a wonderful day.